which I just want to give just a couple of minutes here to give some thoughts about it and let you know why I chose to read what I'm going to read today. This is a long portion, actually, and there's a lot in it. If we were to go through all the details, I would encourage you to read through it, because there's actually a lot there with regard to stuff that I think all of us can relate to. I mean, this is family situations, dysfunction. Maybe some people can relate to some dysfunction. I see that hand. I see that hand over there. So there's lots of very relatable things and very edifying things for us as you read this chapter. There's lots of details about Jacob and his two wives, and looking just at those characters. There's so many characters in this story, in this section of Scripture, with regard to the father, the son, the mother, the wives, the concubines, and all the dynamics involved there. I'm not going to get into all of that, but there's a lot there. But this Torah portion is VaYetse, which is, and then he went out. And this is when Jacob. The immediate context here is the split between Jacob and Esau, where Jacob is sent off by his mother, warning him, not to marry a Canaanite woman, to find someone from their own family to marry in Haran from her brother Laban. And that's kind of where the story begins. So Jacob sets out, and that's where the name of the portion comes from. And so much happens from that point forward when you think about it. So many things happen and change in the lives of both Jacob and Esau. And Jacob never sees his mother again, which is one thing. And it kind of reminded me, when I vividly remember driving down to college, and kind of leaving home for the first time, but not realizing, but in perspective now, looking back, and maybe it's the same for many of you, that was kind of it. Like, that was kind of the end of an era of 18 years of my life, that all of a sudden now things were completely different, and I never really went home again, ever. And so it's kind of relatable to me in that way. And in a nutshell, this whole portion here, Jacob goes out, he comes to a well, he meets Rachel, he goes home, meets Laban, marries Leah, then Rachel. Works for Laban all the time. This is a period of at least 14 to 20 years or more. It deals with Laban kind of in a bad way. Things were changing, kind of got a raw deal. Eventually breaks away from Laban. Laban hunts him down. They hunts him down in the sense of chases after him. Why did you leave me? And then they reconcile somewhat with one another, and that's sort of where the portion ends. So that's sort of the bird's eye view. Some of the details, some of the things that also take place in this portion, if you're not familiar with it, is as soon as Jacob heads out, he comes to a place. It doesn't even talk about it as any special place. It just kind of said he came to a certain place. Basically, he walked until he was tired and then laid down, put a rock under his head, and that was a place where God said, look, this is actually part of the inheritance that I'm going to give to you and your offspring. And he has this amazing dream, which if you want to, figure out exactly what this dream is all about, then good luck. But you can find all kinds of opinions, that's for sure. You can find opinions on where the ladder originated, the angle of the ladder, where the center point of the ladder is over the earth, and the rabbis will tell you exactly where that is. But I think the big picture, and you can look in your Torah tidbits, there's some good stuff in there in your Torah tidbits, which is in the back of your bulletin today. But I think one picture of the Jacob's ladder story, where God is there and angels are ascending and descending, there's this constant activity going on, to me just points to the reality of the God's involvement with humanity through his messengers and through himself, and that he is there, and there's constant work going on. And I'll get back to chapter 28 because that's where I'm going to be reading from today, but we see the reconfirmation of the Abrahamic covenant there as Jacob's out in the middle of nowhere, not knowing what in the world is lying in his future. As we go on, again, I talk about there's a lot of dysfunction in this family with Jacob and his wives and the concubines. It's almost comical, quite frankly. And Anya mentioned it a little bit last week, this idea that, and it's mentioned in your Torah tidbits as well, that Jacob often gets the raw end of the deal. When people talk about Jacob, he's the usurper, he's the cheater, and he got what he deserved through Laban and his, and the fact that he turned the tables on him and he got some of his own medicine. I think he got a raw deal from Laban, that's for sure, but it's not necessarily a sowing seed kind of thing. The fact of the matter is, the only place in Scripture where we see that Jacob is called this evil usurper and the grasper of the heel in a negative sense is his brother Esau, who's not the most stellar character himself either, who's also indicted in a lot of ways in his character. So the only place where we see that, that Jacob, that evil one who will grab and go after things, is really only said by Esau. The fact is, Scripture presents Jacob the opposite, as an Ishtam, as Anya said last week. He's a complete man, a whole man, a gentle person, dwelling in tents. And when you go back even further, before any of the heel-grasping episode, things were prophesied for things to work out the way they did. So I think we often miss that picture of what Jacob was and what he was like and who he was like. I'll find the spot over there, guys. You can relax if you want. If you find it, that's great. But I'll okay, all right, good. So I know you're working hard, but I think I know where it is. Okay. I need some of that. That's great. So anyways, there's a lot of dysfunction in one sense, but again, don't forget that Jacob, if you've had that thought in your mind that Jacob is this crafty guy that did all these things, think again and look at what Scripture says about him. And look, now, was he a stellar, amazing? No, I mentioned one time in a message, he was kind of like, I sort of make this sound sometimes, dope, like just the idea of, just kind of going along, okay, sleep with you, okay, you got the kid's mandrakes, so I get to sleep with her, okay. He kind of just, that's sort of the way Jacob is in a sense when you read the story. He's not, but I wouldn't say he's this evil schemer and planner. He may not be the brightest bulb in the pack, but he's not this evil scammer. But you see stories like that. It's kind of interesting, that mandrake situation, by the way, too. I used to always think of mandrakes as like dates or figs. They're just sort of like a weird thing. But I found out, and you may know this, is that they were thought of to be an aphrodisiac, or actually to increase fertility and so forth. So there's these issues here where you see somebody really trying to manipulate things, and Rachel saying, well, I can maybe get fertility if I get these things, but in exchange for it, I'm going to let her sleep with my husband tonight. Well, guess who gets pregnant? Guess who doesn't? It's kind of ironic, all these things that kind of happen. But we have lessons there of, what happens when we take things into our own hands and try to turn things around. What might happen? Honestly, it's almost comical the way things worked the opposite, and how you're not really thinking straight sometimes. We see that Jacob, again, he kind of acts forthrightly when he tries to kind of get out on his own by saying, look, I'll take the speckled and spotted lambs, a quite unlikely thing. And you get into the whole, how he made the lambs while they were eating and mating look at these spots and speckles of almond branches. And is that, there's all kinds of studies in genetics about it. Is that possible? Does it work? And, yes and no, really. I mean, this is the hand of God really blessing him. So his hand is in this the whole way. This is not a matter of Jacob scheming and planning and how our plans, how we need to kind of twist things to make them work for us. In chapter 31, I do want to, before I get back to tell you why I'm reading what I'm reading today, I kind of find it interesting because you kind of get this snapshot of the culmination of all of Jacob's time away from home and now in this land with Laban and his wives and his kids and dealing with his uncle and so forth. And I kind of see it as this sort of Tevye moment. Have you seen Fiddler on the Roof, when Tevye says, he's trying to reconcile, can my daughter marry this Russian guy, on the one hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, but then on the other hand, eventually he runs out of hands there. But I do see this because we see that Jacob was faithful and he put up with all this stuff for over 20 years. See this in chapter 31, verse 38. So that's, a good lesson for us in terms of consistency in the face of opposition, in the face of sometimes when it seems like someone is actively and proactively trying to thwart your efforts. You see this, that he's put up with all this stuff for 20 years. So is there a lesson in that for us? Well, yes, on the one hand, there is. On the other hand, though, I think there's another lesson for us, and possibly something we can see in ourselves, is that Jacob had, even though he was wonderful and consistent and did all these things, in good faith, it didn't escape his notice what was happening to him. He accounted for everything. You ever been that way before? You're being patient, you're being kind, you're being faithful, but you know doggone well what's been going on, and you're keeping a tally of it, and you're keeping an accounting of it. And Jacob did the same thing, because when you read that passage there around chapter 38, he says, you've changed my wages 14 times, you've done this, you've done that. I've been this way. So he knew all the good things he had done out of the goodness of his heart. And doggone it, you've been doing all these things to me too. So on the one hand, yes, there's a good lesson for us in consistency and faithfulness. On the other hand, I think there's the reality that most of us do hold on to things regardless of how much we're letting it go. And so it's quite a bit to kind of let things go and let the hardship that we endure escape our accounting. Then on the other hand, though, he does know where his success and protection came from. In chapter was it 31? I think I wrote down here verse 42. Hopefully I'm right here. Let's see. He says, "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." This is him speaking with Laban. So we've got a lot of on the one hand, on the other hand with Jacob's life. But I want to encourage you to realize there are lessons in here for us. There's things that we can relate to in here. But right at the outset, in chapter 28, a couple things really just stood out to me and why I wanted to read from here today. Right before the section that I'm reading today, is in verse 15, and this is where, right when Jacob sent out, and he got to the place, and he lays down, and he has this dream, and God says that, look, I'm going to give you all this stuff. And then in verse 15, he says, "Know that I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." So again, this is a reconfirmation of the Abrahamic covenant. I think it's a great promise. And remember, this is on the heels of Jacob fleeing. After this the stealing of the birthright, and basically his mom saying, "Yeah, you might want to think about moving because your brother wants to kill you." On the heels of that, you get this amazing promise that I'm going to bring you back wherever you may go. I'll still be with you. And think about that for a moment. After some of your brilliant ideas and brilliant plans that you've made, and oh boy, you realize you thought about something, you did it, and maybe it didn't quite work out the way you thought it was going to work out, or you realize that was a stupid idea for me. I think the last thing that you're thinking of and the last thing that you're feeling is that things are going to look up. That very night after maybe you're homeless and you're out there with a rock under your head, the last thing I think you're thinking about and trying to grasp onto is the fact that God's going to promise like this, that God's going to keep you wherever you go. This is right after that. Again, this is not like you would think God would say, "What were you thinking? What did you do? Now look at you. You're in the middle of the desert." No, this is right on the heels of that really poor kind of life decisions that happen. So I think that was pretty encouraging to read that. And then I'm reading verses 18 to 21 specifically because I like what Jacob says here in general. They call it his vow. And you can look at this a couple ways. You can say, was this a fleece? Was it simply, was it Jacob saying, "Look, God, if you'll do this, then I'll do that. I'll honor you. I'll pay you a tithe. I'll make you my God," and so forth. I don't think the language is not really so much like that. It's not really like it is conditional, but it can also be translated since you're going to do these things, I'm going to be this way towards you. And to me, this is, I was doing reading a book with my kids a while back and about finances and stuff, and it talked about the basics. What are the basics? Food, clothing, and shelter. And this is kind of cool. This is a prayer right here in the middle of the Bible for the basics, amidst the amazing blessing of numerous nations and numerous descendants and all these kind of things. He says this very simple thing. He says, "Look, here's what I want, I want you to be with me, keep me in the way that I go, give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I'll come to my Father's house in peace." So I kind of think that's a good prayer. It's a good kind of refocusing ourselves on kind of what's important and sort of the basics.